Hi, welcome to The Force Awakens, a speculative commentary. I'm Lisa, and I'm here with my friend Rachel. And I've done commentaries on Force Awakens before with my husband, which you can find under Dan and Lisa Watch Star Wars. And TFA is such a rich movie, and there's so much great content in it. And we're approaching the new movie it's coming up in the next 49 days now, that I thought it would be fun to do another commentary, to take one more pass to the movie, maybe touch on sort of some speculative ideas about how the new movie will lead into the next movie. And I asked my friend Rachael to join me for this. And Rachel, could you introduce yourself?
Yep. So I'm Rachael. I'm one of the co-hosts on Scavenger's Hoard. I really love Star Wars, as you might be able to tell from the fact that I volunteered to do this commentary. And yeah, I guess the appeal for me was that I've never done a commentary like this before. And I was really attracted to the prospect of revisiting The Force Awakens in a post The Last Jedi trailer world, because I feel like that truly shook everyone, in Star Wars fandom at least, not the larger world. But yeah, so I just really want to see this movie again and see how much my perception of it has changed in the months since I last saw it, and particularly since the trailer. So yeah, I'm really excited to do this.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining me. I should point out that we are doing this commentary on October 27th. Like I said, just 49 days out from the new movie. And so we've had the second trailer, like we had a teaser trailer, which happened in May, and then we recently had a new trailer. There probably isn't going to be a lot of additional speculative content between now and the movie's release. There might be an international trailer, and I'm not sure if there will be anything else. So we're sort of at the right point where we sort of have sort of everything we know about the movie in hand. So it's a good time, I think, to do this, and it'll be fun to probably be fun to listen to it after the new movie comes out and see how things have changed for us. So, are you ready, Rachel?
Yeah, no, I'm more than ready to start. Right, should we do a countdown to hitting the play button?
Sure. And where are we? Are we starting from the Lucasfilm logo?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. It's 11 seconds for me. So
I think it's 0 seconds on my tape, but that's fine. We're not in the same room, which I think people don't realize. But yeah. Okay.
Different continents.
Different continents. Yeah.
Right. Okay. 3, 2, 1, play. Something that really, it's easy to forget. When I first watched The Force Awakens, it was really weird to me that there wasn't that Fox fanfare at the beginning.
Ah, yeah?
I really missed that, yeah.
A lot of people.
I think because it's such a big nostalgic thing.
Yeah. I've heard many people say they missed the 20th Century Fox starting.
Mm.
So when you saw this in the theater, were people excited? Did they cheer?
Yeah, they were. It was quite a vocal audience, as far as I recall. And they actually annoyed me a bit, because I'm very much like, it's about the pure cinematic experience. And while I like enthusiasm and excitement in an audience, I don't like it when it becomes obnoxious.
Mm-hmm.
And the crowd I first saw The Force Awakens with was a bit obnoxious, and there were these unwashed guys on either side of me, so it was like this heavy BO smell in the cinema. So this is a very low tone to start this commentary on. But yeah, so basically my first experience of watching The Force Awakens wasn't the greatest because of that, because it wasn't in the best conditions. How about you? When did you first see it? What was that cinema experience with the crowd and everything?
So I went with my kids, and it was the first Star Wars film I saw in a theater with the kids, and so I was super excited about it and had high anticipation, and the kids were tolerant of that.
Bless them.
Yes.
Yeah, just to remind people where we are in the film, the crawl is just coming to an end, and we're just panning down into the inky depths of space. So yeah, it's a very classic Star Wars opener, complete with big ship becoming even bigger than you think it is.
which is a classic move.
Yeah, and I'm constantly at risk of repeating what I've said before in my other commentary, but I do like this opening for having this eclipsing of this moon. I'll just say really briefly and not hammer on it too much, but I do think it's useful to talk about, especially for the end of the film, that the movie uses color motifs a lot, and that moon was blue moon, so it represents sort of the light side of the Force, and it's getting eclipsed by this Star Destroyer. So I think
that's really cool.
Yeah.
I never thought of it like that.
Yes, I think that's kind of notable. And then I think a lot of the introductions of these characters and stuff also use those color motifs to give you hints about them, right? For instance, Finn's introduction, he gets represented by not having a red light on, whereas Rey gets introduced by having a blue light on her head when she's introduced. So here's Lor San Tekka. What would you like to say about him?
Lor San Tekka is a really cool character and a bit of a genius character from this whole world building perspective, because you really do get a sense of the gravitas and importance of this character in the galaxy. And they've really gone home with that because he's quite an important character in the Poe comic in particular. And there's all this stuff about him having worked with Luke and them having like a research relationship, apparently. And yeah, I think they just made the perfect call by casting Max von Sydow in that role, because that's just like an automatic shorthand for this dude is really compelling and interesting, and we have lots more stories to tell about him.
Yeah, he's not used too much in this film, so that's, notable. I think they might have even cut a little bit of what they filmed with him, but he says important things, I think, right? So he starts the film by saying, this will begin to make things right, which I think is probably has a lot of meanings, but it's probably very meaningful for the film, because I think that's one of the themes of this film, and probably will be one of the themes of the trilogy as a whole, right? That everybody's trying to make things right. Like Kylo Ren, spends time saying he's going to finish what Vader started, and there's an implication that Luke has gone off to find the first Jedi temple, right, to try to sort of make things right. Although there's a lot that's left unspoken in this film that you sort of have to fill in, which is what makes it so fun for speculation. The other thing that I think is interesting for me is that San Tekka has that line, which is what is it about your family? You cannot escape the truth that is your family, which is an important statement for Kylo Ren. And I think he does have sort of that gravitas as being sort of the wise old character, right? So I think the few lines he has, we need to take pretty seriously.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I also just like this whole village setup, because you never get to know any of these people, of course. The whole point is just that they're these brave villagers defending their home from these stormtroopers who are burning everything down. But again, it suggests this like fringe culture, and that's really interesting to me, and it's like very rich material for who are these people, why are they out in the back of Beyond, like why is this important man living with them? So yeah, it's seeding all these questions and ideas that they're obviously not going to be revisited in the movies because that's not a focal point, but they are going to be revisited in those expanded materials.
Right. And so here we have Finn's introduction, which is really striking. Do you have any thoughts or feelings about that?
Yeah, I really like this introduction, and it begins what's going to become a recurring theme of characters being introduced when they're masked. So we kind of have to judge these characters like without seeing their faces, which is quite an unusual thing, really, especially for Star Wars, because the heroes, they're typically the humans, they're typically unmasked, so you can always see their body language and read them quite easily. But with Finn, we're first introduced to him as this skittish stormtrooper, and they obviously use that very striking visual device of the blood streaking his helmet in order to single him out, which is really great because obviously the whole point of stormtroopers is they're faceless and they all look the same, but they immediately help you demarcate Finn by marking him in that way. So yeah, it's really cool.
Yep. Yeah, and then here's the introduction for Kylo Ren, which is really striking, I think. And like you said, he comes in with this mask, and you get a really strong characterization of him right away, right? Where he's so very brutal from the beginning, right? And powerful.
Yeah.
He's quite
exactly,
impressive.
which is an interesting thing to me, because I think because of what transpires later in this film when the mask comes off and everything that's tied up with that, Kylo Ren has this legacy of being weak and emo and all those kinds of words. But it's fascinating to see how that's contrasted with the characterization of Kylo when he's first introduced. And like you say, he is so powerful and so formidable and so pitiless. Like, so this is probably the exact character that people expected and wanted. And then obviously the film goes on to deconstruct that in all kinds of interesting ways that I'm sure we'll get to later on.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what I saw in the fan response to Kylo Ren was that people loved these opening scenes. But then there was much more mixed response later on. So, and I think, these opening scenes are important for the contrast they set up, right? So, you get sort of his public persona, and then later on you sort of get a more private persona. And a lot of that's sort of represented by the mask, too. Like, when he has the mask on, he's this tough, brutal figure. But in the scenes where he takes the mask off, you get sort of the more personal, intimate part of him. And you get a very different, feeling for him.
Yeah. I think that moment when you first see, like, Kylo noticing that Finn hasn't fired, I think that's perhaps the first moment where you get, like, a sense of intrigue about that character. Like, beyond the whole, he's a scary Dark Lord. Because it's like, so what's he seeing there? Like, what's going on there? It's very, very curious. And that's one of the underrated things about this film. I think it doesn't spell these things out for you. Like, it never really, truly explains what Kylo was thinking or feeling in that moment. And that's very much left up to the viewer to decide. They kind of allude to it later on when he, like, brings up FN2187, sorry. Like, when he's talking to Hux. But, again, you don't get deeper than that, and it's left to speculation, and it's really cool.
Yeah, I mean... Yeah, this is really why I like this film so much. I mean, I think just even if we weren't going to go on to have another film, the amount that's left unsaid in the film makes for so many different interpretations just of this film itself, beyond thinking about the future, that it's fun to have these conversations about it because you get very different interpretations of practically every scene, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting, like, I've spent a lot of time over the last 2 years talking with people trying to figure out, is that a flaw in the film, or is that, is that a good aspect of the film? So, I think that's kind of an open question.
I know a lot of people find it frustrating.
Yeah, well, and I think it's kind of an unusual choice for something that is so, targeted at such a general audience. It's supposed to be accessible to children, and I think on a surface level it is, but there's a lot there for people who want to think about the film, which was something that was, very striking to me in the months that followed it. So here's Phasma. She's awesome. Do you have anything you want to say about Phasma?
I'll say that I have more interest in the character now that I've read the book Phasma by Delilah S. Dawson, because that's actually a really impressive book. Have you read it?
No, I haven't yet.
It's really good. I recommend it. I still think she was one of the not so interesting characters in that book, ironically, because it's named after her. But yeah, like, it gave me more insight into why she is like she is and what type of person she is, which made her more intriguing.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. I would have loved to have more insight into that character in this film. She felt sort of tacked on in the film, and it was sort of an impressive presence, but didn't get a lot of interesting things to do. Yeah. So we should probably talk about Rey here, right? Because this is such a spectacular introduction for a character. So what are your thoughts on Rey?
Again, I love the introduction. Like, it's continues that theme that we've seen with Kylo and Finn, where she's introduced masked, and then eventually the mask comes off. So the first unmasking is Finn, then the second unmasking is Rey, very quickly. And I think one of the greatest things about that is how it's very much about the body language of these characters. That's how you judge them in the first instant. So Finn is very like skittish almost, and he's clearly panicking when he's in the village because he's in this crisis situation. He doesn't know what to do. Kylo stalks around like a panther, which obviously adds to the intimidation factor, and later on you see that fall apart a bit. And then Rey, she's much more like dynamic and goal driven. So Rey, she seems much more purposeful, and she's very goal-driven in terms of her movements. But then obviously the mask comes off, and you see it's this beautiful young girl underneath, and that's really cool because obviously one of the greatest things about The Force Awakens is that it's this young female heroine, and it is like more really a heroine's journey than a traditional hero's journey, which is really cool.
Yeah. Well, I'm certainly very enamored with Rey's introduction just because it's so fundamentally cinematic, right? Like, it doesn't have dialogue on the whole. And it goes on for quite a long time with no dialogue, so you have to learn a lot through this character visually. And I think they do it extraordinarily well. And I actually think they filmed more dialogue through some of these scenes, especially this initial scene with Unkar, but they ended up cutting it. To just sort of keep her, I think, a little bit more lonely looking, perhaps.
Yeah. Which I think is a great way of doing it because, like, as you said, it's so cinematic, and it's particularly cinematic because it is so silent. Like, we don't hear Rey speak for about 5 minutes after her introduction. It's all about just seeing the facts of her life play out on screen. And that makes total sense because, well, she doesn't have any friends, she doesn't have any family, so of course she doesn't have anyone to talk to. So why would you hear her speak? And yeah, it's really like striking and beautiful. And just like the things she has littered around her home, like the flowers and the pilot doll, it's so pathetic in like a really sad way.
Yeah. I think one of the things that in retrospect, find more striking about Rey is sort of like her childlike qualities. And the fact that she has, like, toys at this point.
Yeah.
She has a little doll that we saw a moment ago, and then she'll play with this helmet and stuff. She feels like she's trapped at the moment that she was abandoned or left or whatever happened to her on Jakku, wherever she got separated from whoever should be taking care of her. She's sort of locked in that state. So
yeah, I think it's like very stunted emotionally, almost like that scene where she just has the pilot's helmet on. Like, that's so incredibly childlike in like a really endearing way. But when you think about the psychology underlying that, it's like she really does have the mentality of a child more than a young woman, really.
Yeah, and I think from like a speculative standpoint, I suspect the next movie, I mean, she gets really beat up by the end of this movie, but I think going to the next movie, she's going to be sort of moving more into sort of an adolescent space, right? Where she's going to be having more a darker view of things, less of a fantasy about what life should be like, and more of a recognition of what life is like.
I think you see that in The Last Jedi as well, because we see that her hair is literally coming down, and that's quite a overt marker of maturity. Like, I'm a woman now, I'm going to wear my hair loose and free. That kind of thing. Yeah.
And I was thinking, it remains striking to me that I continue to have new thoughts about this movie, but it only occurred to me very recently that, like, BB-8 here is to some degree a proxy for Rey, right? He's also been left behind on Jakku, right?
Yeah.
Just like Rey. And for a long time, I had a hard time understanding the scene that we're watching now, where she saves him, but then she's sort of gonna leave him behind. But then she does take him in, and then by the time we get back to the village, she's like, willing to fight for him, willing to give up food, which we've already been communicated that's so incredibly important for her. And it's left open, like, why is she doing that? You assume that they've had, a night together where she's learned things about him. And I think, like, one of the things she probably has learned or feels for this robot is the robot feels very much like a child, in contrast to like R2-D2, who is very competent. And and his situation is very much like her situation when she was left behind. So she's going to do the things for BB-8 that nobody did for her, which is try to get that droid back home, back to its its people. So which I think helps explain why she's willing to leave Jakku when staying on Jakku is so important to her, right? Because what happens to that droid, she projects her own story onto that droid. So
no, absolutely. I think the scene we're on now, also where Kylo's interrogating Poe, I think this actually makes a really interesting contrast to that scene with BB-8, because Poe and BB-8 obviously start the movie out together, and now they're separated and they're in these vastly different situations. And BB-8 is being used to demonstrate Rey's compassion and care in nature, and Poe is being used to demonstrate how pitiless and merciless Kylo is. So it was about establishing those contrasts. Also parallels between them. It's interesting.
Sure. I think the introductions, all kind of have some touch points on sort of compassion versus sort of brutality, right? Like Finn's first act when you see him too is sort of an act of compassion. He refuses to gun down the villagers, just like Rey, right? Like Rey's first act is an act of compassion, whereas the first act of Ren that we see is very much not one of compassion, right? Like he doesn't care.
Yes.
So, there's all these characters, I think have similarities and problems that unite them, but then they're also contrasts to each other. So, I think there's a lot of meaning to the film by looking at those differences.
Yeah. I found that there's something very Dickensian about that whole dynamic between Unkar and Rey. Like, it's almost got this like Oliver Twist to it, like without the whole "please sir, can I have some more?" But like in the sense that in some ways Rey is quite like a Dickens heroine, because she is very long suffering and she is very patient. She's also feisty and tough in a way that you wouldn't really find in a Victorian novel, but in many ways, I guess, she is reminiscent of that model because she's kind of passive.
Actually, the droids are not for sale. Come on.
Yeah, so she's quite feisty, but she's also oddly passive. To a certain extent, in that she just endures and she just sits around waiting for her family to come back and telling herself everything's going to be all right. And then the story of The Force Awakens is how Rey ends up becoming active and like moving on from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fundamentally her arc, right? Is that she's sort of trapped in her childhood, right? And she needs to move on from that, and that's sort of what Maz tells her she needs to do and stuff. And in her case, she has to be pushed out of it, right? Like she's not really going to leave on her own and enter the rest of her life without events intervening. So
no, it's not so interesting to me, because I see a common criticism of Rey being that she doesn't have a character arc, but to me it's a very clearly marked out arc with real progression, like from that initial like passive inert state to an active one where she's forced into the fight and she has to participate and she has to make choices she didn't really want to make. And it's interesting.
I also hear that complaint about the arc, and I do feel like she has a really strong arc, and she is a very, very different person at the end of the film than she is at the beginning. But one of the things that I've thought during watching the film and thinking about it in contrast to Luke's story in A New Hope is, and actually just all the original trilogy movies, like Luke changes, from movie to movie. He matures between the movies in the first trilogy. You rarely see a lot of on-screen maturing. You don't see a lot of change on screen. Like most of the changes that he has in his character tend to sort of happen in the spaces between the movies. And I feel like Rey actually, you see, she has like moments that are where she is fundamentally changed in large ways, and it happens on screen, right? Like she goes to not being a Force user to being like a strong Force user, whereas Luke, it's a much smaller. The changes you see in the movie in the original trilogy are much smaller, which I think the fact that people have want to have expectations sort of meet what's happened before, sort of play into the audience response for this film to some degree. But for me, I thought it was really fun to see significant change, happen on screen in a way that I found both compelling and believable. So,
yeah, no, absolutely. Right, we're on Poe and Finn escaping the finalizer now. And yeah, this is just like a neat little dynamic between them. It's all very like, bro, you're so awesome, bro, which is nice.
Yeah.
And I was actually listening to the J.J. Abrams commentary a bit in preparation for this, and he openly admits that this is all shameless exposition, and they basically loaded it all onto Oscar and John because they can deliver shameless exposition in a really fun and interesting way.
Yeah, it's actually great. Like, if you're gonna do a bunch of boring exposition to throw it into such a fun scene, it's fantastic. So, yeah, and here's Hux and Ren. So I enjoyed all the Hux-Ren interactions in the film. Actually, it's kind of light, but fun, and I think it's kind of nice to have a different aspect of the dark side or whatever. Like they're not completely aligned. They're at odds, and I think at some point, like Hux says, don't let your personal ambitions get in the way of what Snoke wants or whatever, which is very mysterious, right? Like, you wonder what are his personal ambitions that are different from Snoke's interests,
and
right?
how is Hux aware of them?
True. Yeah, so, and I don't think that's answered at all in this film. I hope Ryan picks that up. I mean, I know he probably will. We get the sense that Ren will be at odds with Snoke. But I think we don't fully have a strong sense of what Ren's trying to accomplish. I mean, he sort of says he's gonna, finish what Vader started, but we have no idea what that means. So there's a lot to wonder about there.
Send a squad to the wreckage.
Yeah, I know that Adam, in an interview, he mentioned something about all these things operating beneath the surface that no one could talk about in The Force Awakens, and then in The Last Jedi we actually get to see those blossom and we get to the proper root of things. So I'm really excited to see that, because obviously Ryan was creating The Last Jedi independently, but he was still very, very clearly basing it on everything that had happened and everything that had been said in The Force Awakens. So I don't expect it to be all tied up with a ribbon and be completely cohesive in all ways, but I do expect things like don't let your personal ambitions interfere with orders from Leader Snoke. I do expect that to have some kind of payoff. I'd like to see Kylo become a bit more self-directed in The Last Jedi, for example, and see what he really, really wants. Because I think we kind of lack that, because we don't really have a firm grasp on why he joined the dark side even, and we need that.
Yeah, so many mysteries. So here we are, the TIE fighters exploded, Finn's left alone with the jacket.
The famous jacket.
The famous jacket. I love the jacket. I mean, I think the jacket's great. There's a lot of stuff in this movie about the costumes sort of representing the states of the characters. And so to have Finn at this point peeling off his storm trooper costume and taking on this jacket is useful. It makes sense plot-wise, but it's sort of symbolic of sort of him switching sides. It's meaningful as him taking up a choice of who he's going to be. So I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And
the photography is just so beautiful.
Oh, it is, yeah. And I also was watching something where they were talking about, that his costume gets a little bit transformed too, and just that he's dressed all in black, but as he spends time on Jakku, he's going to get less clad in black, right? Like, he's going to get so dusty and dirty that it'll sort of obscure his origin a little bit, which is kind of cool.
No, definitely. He gets further and further away from that whole stormtrooper persona, including the clothes that he wore as a stormtrooper.
Yeah. Yeah, and here's
I love the squabbling brother dynamic between Hux and Ren. It's so fantastic because it would have been so easy to make this just like Tarkin and Vader. And I
Yep.
think they're very conscious of that dynamic, and the characters are kind of similar in many ways. But that whole childishness to their interactions, that is what makes it feel like something new. And yeah, I love it. It makes it so delightful to me.
yeah, and yeah, I mean, this is like slightly different in like all the heroes outside of the legacy players are all portrayed as really young, right? Like we don't have an older Tarkin-like figure in the Resistance. You have really young people who are all rivals or attracted to each other for various reasons, and so
Yeah.
that's really neat.
There's
I
not
think.
even really a true Han Solo, if you think about it, because Han is very cynical and world-wise.
Yes.
And I guess if any of the characters are similar to him, it's probably kind of Poe. But Poe is almost like too good to be that type of character. Like he's very straightforward.
Yeah, Poe's, you know, Oscar Isaac's fun in the scenes he's in, but he isn't given, that character isn't given much to do, I think. And so, it sounds like it wasn't really the intention originally to have that character last throughout the film and carry on. But now that they're going to keep him on, they're going to have to change him a bit. He can't just be this perfect, happy,
Stand-up guy.
Yeah, he's going to have some challenges and stuff. And it looks like from the trailer he's going to. So,
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the introduction for Finn and Rey together. I think this is super fun. Kind of tricky, right? Because they start off with a lot of hostility. I mean, Rey's a tricky character, I think, because we're supposed to think that she is disconnected at the beginning of the movie, right? She's so independent that she can't really accept help, and she doesn't trust anyone. But we only have an hour to get through, and we have to get her and him on the same side really quickly. It's really tough, and I think they do it well.
Yeah. No, it's nice because there's obviously really limited time in which they can get these characters to bond and get them on the same side. But they do it very quickly in a way that still feels convincing. You can understand by the end of that Millennium Falcon chase why these characters are friends and why they've bonded. And there's something really sweet and endearing about it.
Yeah. And one of the things I was thinking about recently was, I don't think that Rey and Finn will go on to have a real, adult romance or whatever. But there's definitely a relationship with them that is, he certainly has a crush on her. But there's sort of a sweet coming together. Even if it's just a friendship, you have to find a way to build a friendship or whatever. And one thing that I like about this is that they come together quite naturally just because of who the characters are, right? They have similar problems. Like they both start out alone. They're both trying to find a place for themselves, find an identity for themselves. They have similar problems to overcome. And then they both have needs, right? You get the sense that Finn needs to he wants to be a good guy and not a bad guy. And I get the sense that Rey is fulfills that need for him, right? He wants to rescue her, right?
Yeah. In that very first moment, he clearly looks at her and sees this poor damsel being targeted by these thugs. And he's like, oh, I can help here. I can be a good guy. Right. And then obviously the film subverts that. But it's interesting because it establishes something important about Finn's character.
It does. But so he has this need, I think, to, do some good in the world, right? And she has a set of needs that I think at this point she's not really even conscious of, or she's not looking in this direction, but she needs to be connected with other people and to move on and stuff. And she can't do this where she is on her own. And Finn really is the catalyst for all that for her in the movie, as far as I'm concerned. I think Finn is very critical in this film for the arc that goes on in Force Awakens for her, and that he becomes... there's that line about, your belonging, it lies ahead. And I think that probably has multiple meanings. And a lot of people say, oh, that's Luke. And some people say that's Kylo Ren or whatever. But I honestly think in this film, she finds a belonging in Finn,
Yeah.
which is really motivating to her in the final scenes in the movie, where it really sort of allows her to take on sort of the aspects of her future and her adulthood and stuff when he gets cut down. And she realizes that he at the end of the movie, he'll be the one that does the thing that she wants most, which is that she wants somebody to come back for her. And that helps break her out of her isolation. And so they both have something that they need, and they both can give that thing to each other that they need. And so it makes the relationship form very naturally. And I love that. I think it's really well done.
No, they're really, really good foils to each other. And like Daisy and John just bounce off each other so well that they're always great to watch on screen. They do have fantastic chemistry, just like as people and as actors. And you can tell they're actually friends in real life as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just another example of this film's great casting, to be honest.
Oh, yeah.
With poor casting, it would have completely fallen apart.
Yeah. Well, the casting on this film is spectacular, I think. So, so here's the Falcon, which, you know, I think that might be my favorite point, you know, comedic point in the movie, is where, you know, she says, you know, the garbage will do or whatever. Super cute.
Yes.
Super cute, super funny. You know, it's the Falcon. It's a great introduction for the Falcon and stuff.
Oh, in your theatre, did people cheer and clap when the Falcon appeared?
Oh, yes, they did. Yeah, there was quite a bit of cheering in the showing I saw, and certainly this was like a big moment. But, you know, I mean, we haven't really talked about this yet, but a set of themes about this movie are about how the past affects the future, and we have to sort of integrate, you know, the old things and the new things, and Jakku is sort of a setting that illustrates that in a big way, right? The characters are sort of operating within the wreckage of the past, but also having the Falcon and figuring out how to fit the Falcon in, I think, is a little bit interesting. I mean, from a speculative point, I haven't ever heard people talk a lot about, well, a little bit about why the Falcon's there, but it's not something that people really puzzle about that much. I don't know if it's because people just assume, of course we need the Falcon in there, but it is a very strange thing, actually, that the Falcon just happens to be there. So
there's a very weird coincidence.
Yeah. So do you think that is meaningful, or they'll just sort of abandon that and not come back to that?
It's really tough. I kind of wonder if it was perhaps meaningful in an earlier iteration of the film. So there was a really strong reason, like, related to Rey, why that vehicle was there. But as the film is, I really don't see any connection between the Falcon being left there and Rey being left there. Yeah. Because I know one of the popular theories was something like a young Ben Solo like flew off with the Falcon and Rey was on board and he sold it to someone on Jakku. Like, that's a really, like, cheap version, like, of a theory that was probably better thought out than that. But do you know what I mean? It was that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think in the early days,
we've since had materials that debunk that.
Sure,
quite solidly.
Yeah, so. Yeah. I was gonna say, in the early days, I saw that theory a lot, and then it died as the books and stuff came out over the past 2 years. It just didn't sort of fit into the timeline very well.
Yeah. Exactly. But yeah, no, it is one of the most interesting questions. Like, I think that conversation, like, between Han and, like, Finn and Rey on the Falcon later, I think they kind of allude to that with this whole, like, chain of ownership and how it eventually ended up in Plut's control. So I kind of imagine that's really the last we'll hear of it. Like, I don't see it being a story point going forward. But I could well be surprised, because they've kept The Last Jedi on such impressive lockdown that anything could happen.
Yeah. Although when I look at the trailers for The Last Jedi, the one thing that strikes me is, like, there seems to be so much material to cover in the movie that I'm not sure this level of detail they're going to get to, right?
Yes.
It just doesn't seem like they have so much character stuff they have to do, too, that it's just not worth probably coming back to this. So, yeah, so this is a cute part here. I mean, now they're kind of friends, which is awesome.
Yeah, I love that part where they're just circling each other and be like, "Oh, you're so amazing! You're so amazing!" And it's just so lovely. There's such childlike joy in that.
Yeah. So, like coming up soon, I think we'll have like Snoke saying to Ren that there's been an awakening and have you felt it and stuff. And I've heard a lot of people talk and debate what that awakening is. And some people sort of talk about that it's related to Rey leaving the planet and stuff. Do you have an opinion about the meaning of that?
I do think the awakening is Rey. Yes. Like, I know that there's those old quotes from J.J. Abrams where he said it's about the light side of the Force awakening in a young woman and the dark side of the Force awakening in a young man. So I do think it's possible that the awakening is tied to both of them to an extent. And it seems that in the trailer for The Last Jedi, they're going all out with this emphasis on Kylo and Rey as these equal powers. Like with this just terrifying potential in the Force. And I do think that lends further credence to the awakening being about both those characters. So maybe when Snoke asks, have you felt it? He's asking, have you felt it in yourself, as well as have you just felt it as like a tingle through the Force waves?
Right. Well, I've heard some people too sort of point out that you could say Finn had kind of an awakening too, right? That Ren does notice, right, on that planet, Finn breaks out of his conditioning or whatever, and Ren notices. So we just had the flip where Ren asks, what's girl? And then
yes.
we have the cut to Rey, and somebody pointed out, I think on Tumblr I saw, which it's not an idea I thought of, that the next line that she has is it's the motivator. so then Ren says, what girl? And then we cut to Rey and she says, it's the motivator, which may be a joke. I don't know if that's intentional or not. I wouldn't be surprised if it is a joke for the film, right? Because the film is, I think, incredibly clever and full of double meanings. So I'm inclined to think that was put there on purpose.
I do think that the editing in The Force Awakens is severely underrated. It's a very well edited film.
Yeah.
In terms of how well the scenes like cohere with each other and how much the one scene informs the next scene, and it just really builds and builds. It's great.
Yeah. I mean, I've listened to a couple of long form interviews with editors on the film that have been fantastic to listen to. And one of the things that's been really interesting about it is how much of an effect the editors had on the film. I think that both of them had worked with JJ before for a long time, so they had a tight relationship. And their whole story elements that were added, like, including this scene here, which I think they added because, like, the editors didn't like what JJ had done, right? Like, they felt like things were hard to read and hard to tell what was going on, and they wanted the introduction, I think maybe before they weren't under the floor. And they were just around the hall or something, and the others were like, this is not working, the audience doesn't really understand the geography, you need to rework this. And so the editors really sort of forced some script rewrites on JJ, and they all the changes that sort of came out of that, I think, made the film really much, much stronger. I mean, I love this part here too, especially because it has the callbacks. Like, they pull these masks, and those are masks that show up in Empire Strikes Back, when they go into the asteroid and they have to go out and get the Minox off the ship. That's the same set of masks, same place. It's a very subtle callback. Yeah, you have to be super nerd to know that, but it's cool if you are a super nerd. So, okay, so
I feel like a casual now.
I used to not know this much. 2 years ago, I did not know this much, but now I have like a depth of knowledge that's a little bit crazy. So here's Han. Do you have anything that you want to talk about with Han and Chewie's introduction?
Nostalgia feels. I really love Harrison Ford in this film, and I think he does a great job. I think it's kind of emblematic of this Harrison Ford renaissance, because I recently saw Blade Runner 2049, and he was fantastic in that film.
Yeah, that's a good movie.
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think actually, if I'm being brutally honest, I think his performance in 2049 was better than his performance in Force Awakens. But I do sincerely think he's great in both. Like, it's not to diminish what he does in The Force Awakens. I think it's just that the 2049 performance perhaps demands a bit more of him. Because for a lot of The Force Awakens, Han, he is still this, like, fun smuggler adventurer type. The most interesting aspects of Han in this film are when there's, like, allusions to the past, and you really get a sense of this guilt and the weight of everything that's happened bearing on his shoulders. like that's when he becomes a really fascinating character for me here. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
and I
that's,
actually
yeah,
think
that's-
his characterization in this film tests him more than the original trilogy did.
Oh, of course. Yeah. The original trilogy sort of worked towards his strengths when he was a younger actor, I think. And I've said this before. I'm not sure he could have done this performance of this depth earlier in his career. I think he does a fantastic job here. Especially, I love all the scenes with Leia and his son. So
Yeah.
and even the stuff with Rey, where he's very fatherly and stuff, is very sweetly done. So
Yeah. He's like the mentor you always dream of having, I think.
yeah, he's so cranky though. That's a nice aspect too. I was a little disappointed. Like, I watched the whole film, and at some point, I had kind of thought that he'd never used Finn's name, which I thought was kind of cool, because like he's like the cranky old guy who's not even going to bother to learn your name. But I think he does actually call him Finn at one point in the movie. But he just sort of uses nicknames because I can't be bothered. I thought it was kind of a cool characterization.
It strikes me as a very Han Solo thing, so it was very appropriate for him.
And so now we get our
Oh no, not the rough
oh,
task.
not the Raptors. Yeah, this is the time for the bathroom break, as far as I'm concerned. Time
This
to
is
get
the
out.
time where we find something else to talk about that is not what's happening on screen.
I wish we all liked it better. I don't think I've seen anybody who's ever been like, I love that Raptor stuff. That stuff's the best.
I saw that they've done a toy of the Raftar recently, and I felt really mean, but I was like, who's gonna buy that?
I've decided, because like in Rogue One, a lot of people complained about the Borgullet, the other tentacled monster in that film, and I've decided maybe no more tentacled monsters for maybe no more tentacled monsters for Star Wars. We're out on that one.
Yeah, it's like, please move on. I think it's kind of like fulfilling a creature quota, but yeah, that's not a good reason to do something.
Yeah, well, I've said before, in trying to defend this scene, and I do think you need to defend it a little bit, that you have to bind the characters together emotionally. He starts out pretty cranky. He gets a little bit pulled into their story through the talk about Luke Skywalker and the Resistance and stuff. But, if you look back to the original trilogy, he doesn't really get tied in. He's very cynical and not interested in getting involved with Luke, right? Or Leia.
Yeah.
And it's really the set of adventures that they run through together where they, do all these dangerous acts together and save each other, that changes his relationship to those people. And I think that's essentially what this set of scenes is supposed to represent as well, right? Like,
Yeah.
he goes through this, and then he's like, these kids are okay, right?
Yeah.
So they're my kind of
Totally.
people.
Yeah. And I must say, like, for all the bad things I'm saying about this sequence, I do love Tell That to Candy Club. Just the accent and everything. It is quite delightful to me. And like the whole concept of like Han being faced by his debtors in this kind of way, like, it is amusing and it is nice, and it's a reminder of, this is the old Han Solo we love.
Right.
So yeah, like, I don't like despise this bit, and it's not like I'll skip ahead when I'm watching the movie. It's just like, if there's any part where my attention drifts a little, it's this one.
Right. Well, it's not. It's one of the scenes, I think, where we're not really opening up new mysteries about the characters or really changing anything, right? Like, it's much more about recreating who he was before, right? Oh yeah, we remember
totally.
he always talks his way out and all this stuff, and so and that's really different from a lot of the film, which I think does a really good job of moving things ahead and providing surprises and things to wonder about constantly. And this really doesn't have that. And I think the other even weaker part of the movie is the destruction of Starkiller Base with those fighters. And I think a lot of people complain about that being a rehash and that they don't enjoy that. And I think it sort of colors people's perception of the whole film. And in retrospect, I've thought about it some, and I think the problem with that stuff is less that it's a rehash of action that you see in the original trilogy, and more that nothing important is happening in terms of character arcs or the emotional content of the film. You know what's going to happen. And when you think about like the Death Star's destruction, in that those what happens in there are like pivotal character moments, right? Like Han Solo changes. He changes from a rogue to an ally, right? Like he was going to leave and he comes back at the last minute. And then Luke is transformed from being like an ordinary kid into a Force user, right? It's like it's the height of his story. So in that movie, those scenes are really key scenes, whereas in this movie, they aren't. And nothing really is happening. And I
totally.
And I think there are reasons why those scenes are in the movie anyway, which I think we can talk about later because we'll have plenty of time during those scenes.
Yes, we will.
But I
think in the commentary, JJ himself even says, "Now let's get back to the story we really care about," and then the film cuts to Rey and Kylo fighting.
JJ, that should be a hint. Don't put it in the movie. I often wish I had a cut that just didn't have those scenes, but I think those scenes are. I think he got attracted to those scenes for other reasons, sort of for thematic reasons. But that's not a good enough reason. You need
and I think
a character,
they might also
an
be
emotional reason. Yeah, I'm sorry?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was also just going to say that I think they might also be symptomatic of the fact that JJ had to write the script for The Force Awakens in a very short time frame because he came in to replace Michael Arndt and he had Lawrence Kasdan as his co-writer, but they were still writing to quite a tight schedule. So they probably weren't able to come up with these completely novel original concepts as they might have if they'd had longer to develop the story and come up with ideas. I'm actually really interested to see what happens for episode 9. I really do think JJ is going to take on board all the criticism The Force Awakens received and avoid anything like doing Starkiller Base again. But
I hope not. Although I've often thought it would be funny to, say, oh, this time it's different. We have a dozen Death Stars.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So, I don't know what to talk about now.
It's easy to lose your train of thought, isn't it?
Still in the Rathars.
The Raftar's trying to suck up the Millennium Falcon. He got a lovely view of its mouth. I know. Borgullet versus Raftar. Who would win?
Oh, well, the Rathars look more deadly to me. So the Borgullet, the thing about the Borgullet is it seemed to have no important effect on anybody. That was the worst thing about that.
All the plots
creature, right?
It just existed. It's very strange. Thank goodness. There we go. Borgullet's gone. Balatik is now informing on Han Solo, and I think we're up for a Snoke scene.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, let's see. It's easy to get a bit disorientated at this stage in the film.
The droid will soon.
Right. Yeah. Yes, Snoke, my favourite character. Woo! I love me some Snoke.
This is a little over the top, don't you think? This gigantic projection.
You can almost say he's compensating for something.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously there's a lot of speculative content in here, right? Like, what the heck's going on with Snoke?
Yeah.
Why?
I'm gonna guess he must use very low lighting, but like wherever he's based, because we know now from the like publicity stuff for The Last Jedi that Snoke actually has light pink skin and golden robes, which you really would not be able to tell from his appearance in The Force Awakens.
Yeah. Oh, you get the you get the rivalry here. Just super fun. That snotty little look back. And is this a section? I think it is where they did like a CGI helmet on Ren. I think I remember hearing this. Yeah. So I think it's interesting to think about why do that, right?
Well, have you seen the still image of Adam Driver acting this scene without the mask?
No, I don't think I have.
I'll have to send it to you later. He literally looks like a puppy and his eyes are filled with tears.
Oh, wait. I think I did maybe link this. I had like a picture of somebody contrasting a porg with its big eyes with a sort of puppy dog view of Adam Driver. And you're right. It probably was this scene. Yeah.
That probably was, yeah.
So they just decided that was too early to play that card. They didn't want people to...
They They wanted to hide the luscious locks and the sad, sad eyes. I'm sorry, like that would have actually been very interesting to talk about from a speculation point of view. Got somewhat sidetracked. But yeah, no, it is interesting, that scene, because it very much implies that Snoke has no faith in Kylo's ability to like see things through and actually go to the level of what we later find out is killing his dad, because it's not completely clear in that scene what Snoke wants him to do, although it obviously becomes clear.
What'd you do?
It's not completely clear what Snoke wants him to do until like later on in the film, when we realise that Kylo has to kill his father. And yeah, I find that whole dynamic very interesting, and I do think it's laying groundwork that will be revisited in The Last Jedi. So I think we're going to see that relationship probably deteriorate further. I don't see things going well for Team Snoke and Kylo.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to get some more information about Luke, which is also very speculative content, I think, about what happened to Luke from Han's perspective. So there's a lot of stuff in here that I think a lot of people sort of read about, that maybe Kylo Ren was sort of involved in something bad that happened with Luke. I tend to take this scene a little bit as a reference to some degree to like Obi-Wan, right? Like Obi-Wan tells Luke some stories about the past, right? And it turns out that, you know, they're from a certain point of view and stuff. So I kind of wonder whether this is also not an entirely reliable narrative, given the place it has in the story and the relationship between the characters.
Yeah. And it also raises an important question in that, like, what was Han actually told and who told him? Because I think it's probably safe to assume that Han wasn't personally there when everything went wrong with Luke's temple. So he must have heard it from someone else. Was that Luke? Was it Lord Santeca? Was it through the holonet? Like, who knows? So the language he uses is very vague. He doesn't say, like, his apprentice committed a massacre. He said one apprentice and a boy destroyed it all. And that is kind of flexible language. So yeah, I'm very, very curious to see what Rian Johnson does with that. I've personally speculated, based on the new trailer and all this suggestion of this uncontrollable power possessed by Rey and Kylo, that it's possible that Kylo had like an X-Men moment, and he, due to shock or trauma or something like that, just had this explosive outburst of power and lost control and destroyed the temple that way without actually intending to.
Yeah, that could be. You know, there's the various camps in the fandom and stuff, and you know, I think I sort of very much lean towards a redemption arc for Kylo Ren, and a lot of people do, but I think that, you know, sometimes people try also to minimize sort of the level of badness that Kylo Ren might have done before, and so that idea sort of does fall into that narrative, and it may be true, but I think some people are attracted to it because they sort of want to say that he really isn't that bad. But this movie, I think, you know, went to great lengths at the beginning to show us, no, he's bad, and in arguments that I've been having with people online recently, you know, there's a lot of discussion about like how can a character get redeemed, and I've sort of seen people sort of argue about whether Kylo Ren is worthy of redemption, and the point I always feel like I have to make is that redemption's only available to the wicked, right? Like, redemption is not necessary.
You have to have done bad
good.
things to be redeemed.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So talking too much about being worthy of redemption, I mean, I think there's something to say about it, about whether the audience will accept it. But in the context of the Star Wars universe, he's totally worthy of redemption, right? If Vader was worthy of redemption, Kylo Ren is worthy of redemption.
Yeah. I think the thing for me is that it's like even if he didn't deliberately murder his fellow students at the temple, like you say, at the beginning of The Force Awakens, we see him do lots of very, very bad things. So there's definitely still a lot of things for him to be redeemed from. I do agree that saying, oh, but he didn't kill anyone at the temple, not intentionally, that kind of can verge into woobification, but I think it depends on how it's handled. I think if it's kind of narrative where, oh, he never did anything wrong and he's a harmless little lamb, then that's obviously going too far, and I don't think that would ever happen. But I do think it's possible that people's perception that Kylo is the evilest evil to ever evil will be modified by The Last Jedi, shall we say. Yeah, sorry, we should move on.
I think that's true. And I think there will be sort of a complicated relationship between him and Luke, and so if he didn't, if things are a little less terrible at the outset, then that would actually make that relationship a little more interesting. So, okay, so Maz is a complicated character. Not in terms of complicated in the movie, I think just complicated in terms of, I think they sort of struggled to figure out how to use this character in the film.
Yes.
And I think I read that they strove really hard to have practical effects in the film, and all these characters here are all practical, but Maz is not. And I think I'd read that part of the reason Maz wasn't a practical effect is that they just like struggled trying to figure out what she was supposed to be and what she was supposed to look like till so late in the film that it was just easier just to do a CGI character because they could figure some of the details out a little bit later.
Yes.
So what's your take on Maz?
Like, as a character, like, I quite like her. She's definitely not like a favourite character or anything, but I do like that whole idea of taking like this sage, wise character and making it a woman. Like, it's very much that whole crone archetype, which is nice because I don't think we really get that in Star Wars otherwise. So it's nice to see this older female character as the font of all this wisdom, and see her as this mentoring force to Rey, because otherwise she does spend much of this film surrounded by men and receiving advice from men and guidance from men, and it's nice to have some kind of diversity in this way.
I think it's kind of cool too. I think I read that the character JJ modeled this character after a woman in his own life, right? This was supposed to be very much modeled after a school teacher that he knew that was important when he was a child. So so that's cool that it has kind of a real life antecedent. Okay, well, and we should probably talk about this. This is a big moment, right?
Yes,
and it's weird, and what the hell's going on?
To be honest, it makes me ask very practical questions, like how often does he do this? Like, is this a regular occurrence? Like, is it like a therapy session for him? But yeah, no, to get more serious, it does raise really interesting questions, like the whole show me again thing. It's like, okay, Kylo, what did he show you before? And under what circumstances did he show you things? It's very interesting to look at this in relation to The Last Jedi, because...
So I feel like this has to be answered in the next film, right? Like, they have to provide... like, this isn't like The Falcon. You have to provide some explanation as to what the hell's going on here.
Yeah. I'm not sure it'll be, like, literal. This is why Kylo was talking to Vader's helmet. But I definitely think there will be some kind of explanation for why Kylo has this fixation with legacy and why he in particular idolizes his grandfather so much. The Last Jedi, I think, really, really has a duty to dig into that, because I think that stuff is the key to Kylo's motivation and why he fell to the dark side in the first place.
Yeah.
Leia doesn't want to see me. Please, we came here for your help.
What fight? The only fight.
I do think it's possible that Bloodline has the keys to that as well.
I've seen evil take many forms. The Sith. The Empire.
Because the whole plot of the book Bloodline is that Leia's parentage is found out in the Senate, and she basically becomes a pariah. No one wants anything to do with her because of that. And she is very concerned because she can't get this news to her son Ben because he's uncontactable, like in whatever region of the galaxy he's in. And we never get the other side of that story. And yeah, I kind of have the sense that has to feed into The Last Jedi somehow. Not in the sense that we'll explicitly like call to mind bloodline, but in the sense that it will refer to that period in Kylo's life, because that's probably around the time that he fell.
Yep. Okay, and so I think in my other commentary, I spent a long time talking about this scene because it's sort of central to the film. And I think I will talk about it a little bit here, just because I know when I like look at the statistics on the views and stuff for that commentary, this part of the movie is the thing that people re-listen to a lot.
Oh, wow.
So basically, at this point in the movie, it's sort of, I think, key because it sort of unites all these characters. So she has this talk about there being, the same eyes in different people, which I think you can take as the same eyes across time, but it's also sort of speaks to the fact that people are the same and have same motivations. And she sort of talks about how Finn wants to run. So, and she also tells Han he needs to stop running, right? And she tells them that they need to engage with the fight. She's sort of giving us words of wisdom same way that Lor San Tekka is giving words of wisdom. So we should pay attention to what she says, I think more so than some other characters. And so at this point, I think we really learned that all three of these characters have very similar motivations, right? Like they're all running away from different things that they need to do. They all need to sort of engage in the fight with the dark side, as Maz says. And it's going to be difficult for them to do that. In order for them to have that moment of engagement, they all have to do it through sort of love, through for someone that they care about. And so right now, Finn is going to run away because he fears the First Order. And he's going to come back and engage in the fight against the First Order, essentially for Rey. Rey is literally going to run away, right? When she's presented with her future and the destiny and the need for her to take the saber and the Force, she'll run away. And she'll stay unengaged till much later in the film. And then Han is also running away, right? He's running away from his responsibility towards his family. And he needs to face the dark side in the aspect of trying to reclaim his son from Snoke. And he will only be able to make that turn to the fight for love as well, right? He does it for Leia. And so all of them need a belonging to make them do what's right. And for me, this is what the film is about. That it's about that we all need to engage with the fight, but we all have to sort of overcome fear. Love can overcome fear and sort of gird you for the fight against evil. And so at this point, I think he's abandoning her the way that she felt like she was abandoned when she was on Jakku. And so this is a key moment where she hears her own voice as a child, right? Which helps tie Finn's abandonment to her abandonment as a child, which is important for later in the film when Finn comes and returns for her and he comes to rescue her. He doesn't tell her, we've come to rescue. He tells her, we came back for you, which I thought, like, on my first viewing, I thought, well, that's a weird way to say that because they didn't leave her on Starkiller Base. But the point of phrasing it that way is that he comes back for her, which is the thing that she's been waiting for her whole life, right? So to a large extent, I think Finn becomes her belonging in this film. And so later on, when they meet Kylo Ren in the woods, it's really when Finn gets cut down that she takes up the saber, right? And she takes up the Force in the fight. And so I think I don't see a lot of people talk a lot about that relationship in the fandom and stuff. And I do think going forward, the relationship between Rey and Ren will be sort of a driving one. But in this film, Finn is really important to Rey's story.
Oh, totally, yeah.
And I'll be interested to know how that develops and changes or is important in the upcoming films. I would assume that, it may just be the same as Empire Strikes Back with the, your friends are in danger, so you will come for them. But we don't really know. I should be quiet now because there's a lot of speculative content in here. And so I wanted you to speak to this probably, the whole Force back stuff. I'm going to chicken out.
Okay.
So
I'll try my best. So Rey is reaching for the lightsaber. And then we go into the halls of Bespin. And it's actually quite handy to have the subtitles on here, as I do, because they give a very clear indication of what's actually being said. And seeing it again is interesting because you do get that different view, particularly on the temple destruction, like that scene where we see Luke place the hand on R2, because it does suddenly seem a lot more chaotic and a lot more sudden. Like you see this like burst of debris kind of in that moment, and that's interesting because I had a very different perception of that scene before I saw the trailer. I kind of thought Luke was coming back to discover like this awful tragedy that had happened, but the trailer now makes it look like Luke was there when the tragedy happened, which puts a very different spin on it. And yeah, it's amazing how it changes your perception. And yeah, I find it very interesting in the vision how heavily featured Kylo is throughout it, especially given the speech that Mars goes on to say, like about like belonging lies ahead and that kind of thing. I'm not saying that Kylo is necessarily her belonging, and you said it before that in this film her belonging is very much about Finn, but I think that in any realm the nature of that vision means that these two characters are going to be very important to each other's stories, and there's going to be lots of crossover and parallels in their journeys.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think Finn and Rey are very important for each other's stories, but they do kind of occupy very different worlds, right? Like they're clearly very dear to each other, but she's living in this, magical realm, and he's very much an ordinary man, and so that creates some level of distance between them in terms of how much they can come together or understand each other. And one of the striking things about this film is that Finn he never gets to see Rey transformed, right? Like she hints at it to him when they meet, and when she fights Kylo Ren, he's already out. So he actually never sees her, as the new person that she is. And so he doesn't really even have an inkling. He still sort of has this idea of her as, the girl that he's going to save. Whereas I think Kylo Ren, you get the sense that Kylo Ren knows her in a way that Finn doesn't know her. Both because those two characters are very similar in terms of being both very lonely, both very powerful. And so for that reason, they'll be probably matched in a special way. So
yeah, no, it's really true. So like when you really think about it, that last moment where Finn like sees Rey, like she's unconscious, he thinks she's completely helpless, so I expect that when he wakes up again he's probably terrified about her. He probably thinks that Ren took her captive. And yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see that moment in The Last Jedi, because I think that has to be covered. Yeah.
And I think I've said this before. It kind of reminds me of Han Solo waking up from the carbonite and Leia telling him that, Luke's a Jedi. And he says, what? Like, I'm out of it for a little while and everybody gets these delusions of grandeur. So maybe it'll echo that? I don't really know. And here's Hux doing his crazy, crazy stuff. Not a lot of
I love Donald Gleason.
Oh, he's great here. He's
magic.
I think I heard Abrams say like what it was like to be on the other side of the camera on this. Was maybe in the commentary where he was like, wow, he was like, that is like more than he was expecting from that performance. So
yeah. I know that they did several different takes, and like in each one, like JJ was like giving him very different like instructions. So in one he's relatively muted and understated, in another he's a bit more passionate, and in the one they actually used he's completely unhinged and off the rails. And I love that they used the unhinged one, because I do think that's such an important quality of that character. Just this deranged passion for the cause. It's really
and I don't think
well portrayed, and it's a good distinction from the Empire.
Yeah, and I actually don't think you get that from any of the rest of his scenes, right? He's very controlled in all the other scenes, yeah? Or not?
I do actually get the sense that he's always kind of like tense and tightly wound up.
Yeah.
Like bristling at the edges.
He could
so I
explode.
think he's always like waiting the whole film to make this speech, and it's like this huge release for him.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. Okay, this is the super weapon.
Blah blah blah.
Yeah. I don't know what to. I don't know.
There's some very cool extras who are watching the explosion. They
oh
have
yeah,
very
sure.
cool
Yeah, no, I like all the
designs.
costumes and stuff. I guess we can jump. We should probably just start talking about Rey and Kylo Ren to a large extent. I think.
Yeah, that's
Now,
true. It will go by before we know it.
Yeah, it's super brief, and there's a lot to say about it. Yeah. This is, this is kind
go
of
first. Do you go first? I go first.
Well, I was going to say just this little scene with BB-8. I kind of had a thought about it the other day, where she sort of says, BB-8, you're too important. You have to go back. And I'm like, Rey, you too.
You're also really important, girl. You're really, really important.
So once again, BB-8's kind of a stand-in for Rey.
Yeah. And there's also a great deal of irony in that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there is. Okay, then there's this, there's the speculative stuff here with her. She's saying, yeah, there's a story, but some other time. I don't know if we'll ever get the story or not, but
probably in a comic book. Let's
probably
face it.
yeah, it's a good place for it. Probably. I don't know if I really need it in the next film. Yeah. So I like it, when I did our previous commentary, I just sort of stayed away from all this stuff in the Force back and the media. Like, we just sort of talked to the things that were really tangible for this film. But there's so much to say about what these scenes say about going forward. And, from my perspective, the one thing I will kind of say that I haven't said before is that I do think Rey and Ren are kind of twins throughout the film. And at the end, I think a lot of the lines that Ren says to Rey, he can effectively say about himself. Like, Han Solo can't help you. You're so lonely. Almost everything he says is a line that you could apply to him. And that's the same thing in the trailer. A lot of people are like, do these lines apply to Rey, or are these lines being spoken to Kylo Ren? And I think the meaningful part of the trailer is that, they could be said to both. That's probably the where you should look for meaning in the trailer. So I think that's pretty interesting. And then, you can see he's mainly interested in the girl. But I should lay off and let you say, what you're interested in saying about this. So.
Yeah, no, like, I love how there's no time wasted in terms of the Kylo and Rey stuff here. It's not like you see Kylo going off and, like, taking out, like, resistance troops. Like, as soon as he lands on that planet, the only real thing he's interested in is the droid and the girl. And he's immediately off in his pursuit of them. And I really find the editing and the cutting really interesting as well in that sense, because you see him react not to the mention of the droid, but to the mention of the girl who is accompanying the droid. And that, of course, raises the question of, but the droid is the one with the information you need, surely. Why is this girl so interesting? And again, I think this is something that The Last Jedi has to address, because there is this whole underlying thread of fascination, like, about Rey for Kylo, like, long before he's even met her. So we need to understand why that is. And I absolutely think we're getting that, because they're building up so much this mysterious connection between them and how they're parallel characters and everything.
So, and clearly she has, like, a vision of him before he shows up in her life and stuff. Do you think we will get some sense that he's aware of her via similar means, or do you have any sense of...
I think that's possible.
It's fine. You don't have to speculate. Yeah.
No. I absolutely think that's possible. I'm trying not to get myself too attached to specific scenarios, which is why I really shouldn't think so much about the whole accidental explosion thing, because it is easy to get attached. But yeah, I absolutely think it's possible, because there's a precedent for that in Rey's vision. So Rey's vision where she sees lots of Kylo. So what's not to say that Kylo hasn't also had visions where he saw lots of Rey, but at the time he didn't know what to make of that, and he had no idea who this girl was, because Rey, when she has that vision of Kylo, she quite clearly has no reference point for who he is, apart from he's this scary person who I want to get away from, and he frightens me. I
think when I first saw the movie, I, like a lot of people, had this idea, mainly coming out of the trailers, right, that Rey was like Luke's child, and so sort of read a lot of things like, well, maybe he knows her from the past, right? Like, obviously he was with Luke. But I don't think that anymore, just because the timelines and things don't match up, and there's so many other things that say that that's not true in this movie and in the accessory material. But so there has to be some other explanation, I guess, right? That he knows her and how he knows her.
Exactly. I think it's possible that this connection through the Force is something that they've both felt their whole lives, perhaps without ever really recognizing what it was. So I think it's possible that with Rey and Ren that they've felt each other through the Force without really recognizing what that means since they were kids. Like, possibly since they were born, even. Like, at least in
maybe
Rey's case.
Yep. Okay, and so here they're gonna meet. One thing I will say about the two characters that I was thinking about the other day was, like, how, like, thinking about costume, right, and how it informs the characters. And so, Kylo Ren definitely has this scary underworld look to him. And everywhere he goes, there's fire, which is not something that you saw before. So, and they put a lot of effort into making all that fire. So that's done for a reason. But then, Rey's costume kind of mirrors his costume too. And obviously you have kind of a white and black contrast going on. But also I was thinking, her costume is a little bit like his, but it's kind of more juvenile, right? With the short pants and stuff. And I sort of think, they're very similar characters, but also they're a little bit different in that she's sort of like a younger version, like more she's more childlike.
That's really interesting.
He's more like an adolescent, right? And there's the age difference between the actors and stuff. So I think that's kind of interesting. I mean, they both have.
I think his outfit also screams repression because he really is wrapped up in all these layers.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, he even said that, like, the putting on the costume makes him so angry, like the Adam Driver, that it, like, helped inform the character because it's an uncomfortable outfit to wear. But you sort of think about that they have the similar problems, that they both have been abandoned. You sort of get the sense, like, she's literally been abandoned, and then he sort of feels like he's been abandoned by his family. Yes. But they have very different responses to that, and hers is more like the response of, like, a very young child, and his is more of, like, an adolescent, right? Like, so I think that's interesting. And so here he's carrying her off. Do you want to say anything about that? I'll leave that
so
one
much
to
has
you.
been said about that shot. I don't think there's really much I can add to the vast quantities of material that have been written about that shot. Like, it's obviously very much like this dark being taking the fair maiden into the underworld, and that, like, vibe is further underlined by how Finn responds to it, because it's this, like, moment of utmost peril. There's something very, like, old Hollywood about that, like it's in the monster taking the girl to his lair,
right?
Which really appeals to me, and I think it's an interesting choice because it does play on very different levels to different people. So I know that to some people it is purely that monster reading, which is perfectly legitimate, but then obviously to other people watching that scene, then they might have, like, a more, like, oh, why is he holding this girl like this? What does that mean about how he thinks about her and his plans and all that kind of thing? So yeah, it is a very interesting choice on the part of JJ that I would like to hear him talk about. Yeah,
it is, and it's a contrast to pose interrogation and capture and freezing and stuff. But I think that those were sort of set up as contrasts intentionally, both to sort of tell you that there's an attitude difference, but also so you just don't have to, like, think about all these new things about this character, right? Like, if we didn't have the Poe stuff, then Ren shows up and he freezes somebody and he carries her off, and then he does this interrogation using this method we haven't seen before. But we've already had that introduced to us with Poe and stuff, so we don't have to worry about the details of all this magic around it, and we can sort of concentrate on sort of the emotional highlights and the relationship and what's going on. So I think it was sort of a very clever thing to do. And then also gives you an opportunity to think about why is his approach to this girl so different from the way that he approaches Poe. So I super like that about the filmmaking and the movie.
It really does challenge you in that way. I think it asks you to pay attention and to think about the film in terms of contrasts and parallels, and think, oh yeah, that did happen earlier in the film, and he's acting really differently now. I wonder why that might be. And I think if you think about the film in terms of that longitudinal perspective, you get a lot more out of it.
Yep. So do you have anything you want to talk about like Han and Leia and Han and Leia's relationship? Because we get so very little of this, and this is sort of the time to talk about it.
I really like seeing it. I kind of wish that Leia had a bit more to do. So I completely understand the choice to leave her out of the film until Takadana, because that does make a lot of sense in terms of the film structure, and it might have seemed a bit arbitrary if she'd just been thrown in there earlier. But yeah, in a way, it's kind of like Leia is only there to exist in relation to Han and Ben, to a certain extent. So I would kind of like to have seen more of General Leia. We get bits of that, especially when she's dealing with Finn and Poe and talking around the boardroom and stuff. Yeah. But yeah, it'd be nice to see more of Leia in her elements, and thankfully I do think we're getting that much more in The Last Jedi. Fingers crossed, at least, and that's the impression I get. So
I really hope so. I feel like, I was a little kid when the original trilogy came out and stuff, and one of the things I remember, which may, I don't know how true this is or whatever, was I always felt like I was promised that I would get a story about Leia. After, we finished Luke's story, we'd go on and we would hear a story about Leia and the Force and stuff, and I felt like I never got that. And so I hope we get something great out of the next movie. I'm incredibly sad that we lost Carrie. Because Leia's such a great character in the abstract, but she's so often, in so many of the movies, she shows up being used for other purposes other than her own, right? So, like in the first movie, she's cool, but she's kind of been there to be rescued. And in the second movie, she's cool again, but she's also mostly there to be sort of won by Han. The third movie's great. I think the third movie is my favorite Leia movie because it's like Han and Leia equals working together, and it's very sweet. And she's her own person in that film. And right in this film, she's a little overloaded with exposition. She doesn't really get to say a lot. She has to like I heard some people criticize her performance, and I'm like, well, they really handed her not fun stuff to do, right? Like she has to very quickly say a bunch of things about the past, and it's hard to do that well. So it's not a great showcase for Carrie, this movie, I don't think.
No.
But that's fine. Yeah. Okay, and so
and
R2-D2
I still think it's nice. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I still think it's nice that we do really get a good, strong sense of how much love Leia has for her son still.
Yes.
And how that's contrasted to Han's feelings about Ben. So I think both of them are understandable in terms of their responses to the situation. But I think it's so important that we see that at least one parent still has hope for him. Because otherwise there's something so desperately sad about that if both his parents have just completely given up and they have no faith that he could ever come back to them. Because,
right.
Yeah, Star Wars is all about hope. You need at least one person in this situation to have hope, and that is Leia. So I'm really, really curious to see how that's handled in The Last Jedi. Because you could easily argue that The Force Awakens gives that character a reason to lose all hope in Ben. Because he killed his dad. He killed my husband. Yeah. Like, if anyone were to lose hope in that situation, you could not possibly blame them for that.
Yep.
So, yeah, like, I'm really curious to see how that's handled. I like to think that she'll still have hope and belief in him, like, to an extent, even while that's going to be heavily, heavily modulated by sadness. But I'm going to try and go without assumptions.
Well, the trailer kind of looks like she she still cares deeply for him, just from the brief scenes that we sort of see where they're intercut or whatever.
Yes.
And it's questionable what the heck's going on there, but you can see there's a lot of emotion there, right? And I don't think you have that kind of emotion if you've given up on somebody, right? So
yeah, totally.
I think she still will be an advocate for Bran. Okay, so I'm gonna step away now, and you're gonna talk about this scene.
Oh my gosh, I feel the weight of expectation. So yeah, this is Rey's interrogation on Starkiller Base. It opens in a very peculiar way with Kylo crouched in front of her, calling her his guest. That's obviously heavily perplexing for both Rey and the audience, because it's kind of like, what are you doing, you creepy weirdo? And on a more serious level beyond that, it does have interesting implications, because the framing is very evocative. So it's this whole like kneeling night pose, and then the lady like shining with light that he's gazing up upon. There's something very like his ancient about that symbolism almost. And yeah, like it sends a powerful message about how he perceives her in particular. So she is this literal beacon of light because she's shining, and the lighting is used to demonstrate that. And then of course he unmasks. And I know that lots of people laughed when Kylo unmasked and they saw what he looked like underneath. Is that true of your theatre, Lisa?
No, I don't remember that.
Yeah, I don't think it happened to me either.
So.
Yeah, but I've heard people say that quite often. And I can totally understand why, because just that one shot where he's like preening and like his hair is perfect. It's so absurd in a Star Wars context that it's like, what are they doing? Like, it's just completely unfamiliar. And then this intimacy with which he positions himself next to Rey, that is also very like jarring, because we've had like torture scenes and interrogations before. So in A New Hope, we see that torture droid go into Leia's cell with Vader there standing over her, and there's obviously threat implicit in that, but that is so different in terms of the execution and how it's handled, because in A New Hope they cut away before you actually see how anything is handled, and the only implication there is that Leia is going to be brutally tortured on a physical level. There's none of this interpersonal stuff that you get in this scene that I find so interesting, because it's very much about these characters like figuring stuff out about each other. And Kylo obviously starts off in this quite smug, elevated position where he considers himself to have all this superior knowledge about her, and he's given her advice and saying, oh, I wouldn't trust Han Solo if I were you, and he clearly feels that he's being helpful in some twisted way, but Rey of course is not interested in that. And then the wonderful thing, the truly powerful thing about this scene is how Rey is able to fight back against him, and she completely hands his ass to him in terms of the Force. Yeah. And it's just so delightful to watch that turn. And this scene, or specifically the climax of this scene where we really see Rey get inside his head and we see that switch where he starts to look terrified. Like, that exemplifies why I'm so fascinated by these characters and the dynamic they have and will continue to have, hopefully, in future movies.
Yep. Yeah, no, this is... definitely that scene sort of tells you that relationship's going to be key for the for the upcoming movie. And I like you, super like the moment where, the power dynamic flips, and, in terms of negative audience response to the film, I've seen two very different camps, which I think are fascinating because they're so very different and very passionate, right? But there's certainly a camp of people who don't like the movie because they feel that Rey's too powerful, right? Yeah. And so that moment is a really key moment that is very upsetting to them. There's also a camp, though, that and I think you know this, of people who are very disturbed, and I think appropriately so, by that scene, the sort of creepy nature that he's sort of, controlling her, who also sort of are disturbed by, like, her lack of power. And so sometimes I hear people sort of try to sort of diminish her power in that scene. If they sort of take that tack that she's so helpless and he's so terrible, they diminish her power. And then there's this other camp that's like, she's too powerful. And oddly, that tends in the audience to be split boy-girl, right? Like, most of the guys I see who are upset about the movie are upset about Rey being too powerful. And for girls who don't like that scene, a lot of times it's that Rey feels too vulnerable. And I think it's really in the middle, right? I think what this movie tries to communicate is that these characters are equals. And I think we'll see that in the next film, and I think we've already seen that in the trailer, right? And that's what's fun about the interrogation scene, is that he comes in thinking that he has power over her, and he finds out no, they're evenly matched, and that shows up at the end too, right? Where he's like, "Hey, I can teach you," or whatever, and she's kind of like, no way. So, but a lot of the discussion I saw sort of on the Rey is too powerful side, people would sort of say it's not a good movie. Like the protagonist shouldn't win over the villain so easily. And generally, when I had sort of conversations and arguments with people over the past 2 years about this, the way to turn people and get them to think about it in a way that makes them like the movie is to sort of tell them, well, what if you look at this movie from the opposite perspective and think of Kylo Ren as the protagonist, and then the fact that he's overcome and he faces challenges and he loses at the end of the movie. If you see him as the protagonist, the stakes are raised for him. And and then usually people at that point go, oh, that's a totally different perspective, and people didn't come in to the film expecting that, and so it can be a little bit hard for people to see that on an initial viewing. But when you sort of point it out to them, because his story in this movie, from my perspective, is really compelling, right? Because he's a really tragic figure throughout the film, right? Like, he's struggling, he's grappling with really difficult things, and then he's threatened by this girl. And from my perspective, the thing that I sort of found compelling about the second half of the film was that every time she sort of gains power or skill, it's kind of at his hand, right? It's something that he's doing that's causing it. And the interrogation scene is sort of the opening moment for that. Like, it's because he sort of pushes into her mind that she is able to figure out how to push out herself. And so it's super tragic. And so a very compelling story if you look at it as Kylo Ren is the hero, right?
Yeah. No, that's a really interesting way of viewing it. And I really do think that he's as much a protagonist of The Force Awakens as Rey and Finn are. Like, they all have quite clearly marked out arcs and character growth. And it's quite a fascinating viewing experience. I agree that Kylo's arc and development might be the most nuanced and interesting of those three. But yeah, it's so fascinating, and it means that different people can come to this film and get completely different readings from it, like depending entirely on the perspective you adopt for it. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I think the only problem emerges when, like, anyone of any camp in terms of their perception, like, argues that their reading of the film is the only correct one. Because I think the joy of any good film is that it can and should be read in so many different ways. Like, that's art, basically. So, yeah, it's wonderful.
And honestly, I don't object to anybody's reading in this film. I haven't seen a reading of the film that even though I've seen very, very varied readings, I don't object to any of them. A lot of times people are very passionate about them because of their reading. It really touches something in their life that's important to them and stuff. And one of the things I'm a little bit sad about is that, when we go on with the next movies, some of those readings will become, not true anymore. I mean, you'll always have this movie, and you can love it for itself and just try to ignore the rest of the movies, but it will sort of impact people's feelings about the first movie, and because it's the opinions are so wildly different. That I worry about it a lot. I love this movie for the fact that it has so much expanse within it that it can accommodate so many people and so many viewpoints and things, but it is also really risky. I think this is an incredible, people talk about this film not taking risks. I think it takes a tremendous number of risks. Yeah. And certainly by leaving things so open, I think that's one of the key risks that the film took.
Yeah. I think that the fact that so many different facets of the film have upset and angered so many people is a sign pointing towards exactly how risky The Force Awakens is. Because if it had been a completely predictable and safe film, people would be meh, rather than, oh, I hate this scene so much, or, oh, I hate this character choice so much. So I can guarantee that if Kylo had just been this more like generic villain, perhaps he hadn't been the son of Han and Leia, he had just been like a hooded, dark villain, more like in the Darth Maul mode, people would probably like have mild grumbles and say, oh, he's a bit flat, he's not a particularly interesting character. But I don't think there would be this like intense, passionate dislike. that you quite often see for Kylo online, and you definitely wouldn't see the whole "oh, he's an emo wuss crybaby" thing, like, because that characterization in itself is incredibly risky.
Oh yeah, definitely, and it so violates people's expectations. I think a lot of viewers come to Star Wars because they like a little bit of the power fantasies of some of the characters. People kind of enjoy watching like Vader. Like that was true in like Rogue One. People had like a bloodlust for Vader. They just wanted to see him come in and slaughter. I saw a lot of people who just wanted him to slaughter all the heroes and stuff. And which is not my perspective, but I understand it. And so people, I think, came into this movie thinking I'll be able to sort of identify with Kylo Ren and his, you know, his magical powers and stuff. And then they find out, oh, he's all teary-eyed and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's not what they wanted, and so it creates a pretty passionate pushback. But I do think it's a daring choice, and I think it's an interesting choice.
Yeah,
So-
definitely. We should probably say where the film is, because I think that was a long segue. So Han and Finn have reached Starkiller Base, and I actually love this little exchange between them, where like Finn obviously says the classic line, "We'll use the Force." It's not how the Force works.
Right.
I just love that moment, and it's such a classic Han moment. Like in that moment, I see no Harrison Ford, I just see Han Solo, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, I think Boyega and Harrison have a pretty good dynamic as well, and so
Oh, yeah.
it comes through on the screen. So I mean, I guess we should talk a little bit. Like we're gonna come up. Oh well, that's the Phasma stuff, which is disappointing. I'm not sure whether it's worth talking about. I did listen to your podcast, or at least part of your podcast, where you guys were talking about the Phasma novel. And it sounds like I need to read it because I hate this character in this film because it feels like she doesn't make any sense to me in this film, and it sounds like they made a lot of effort in the novel to try to make sense of what she does in this film.
Yeah,
So-
I think that's exactly what it's about, and while that's a good thing, I think it's also a bad thing to a certain extent. So yeah, that is absolutely what the novel does. It tries to like explain the characters' choices and actions in TFA, and I think that's both a good thing and a bad thing, because it's good in that we finally get answers, but it's bad in that we should have had some concept of that in the film itself, because the vast majority of the audience are never going to read that book, and so it's a bit of a shallow gesture to a certain extent.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, so we can. I don't know how much time we have here with this. It's such a kind of throwaway scene.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some cute things. They try to make it funny, which is nice.
Yeah. I think that's potentially also a bit of a problem, though, because it is such a big key moment. They are letting down the shield so that the Resistance can attack. That should be like a pivotal turning point. But because it is turned into like a bit of a joke scene about the trash compactor, it kind of loses some of that. I mean, it is a nice, fun moment, but yeah, I'm not sure it has the right weight.
Yeah. Well, so I think. Oh yeah. So now we have this super boring stuff about Poe. I just kind of feel bad about Poe, because actually, if this part weren't in the movie, I think I would be more happy about Poe as a character, right? But this part just goes nowhere emotionally. So so it's just tedious. But I will say, like, the one thing that I like in my previous commentary, I like half got this idea, and now I finally have wholly got this idea, which is that I think that one of the reasons that Starkiller Base is in here, originally I was like, well, it's kind of a backdrop and it's not really central in the same way the Death Star is. But I honestly think that this set piece is in here for thematic reasons. The Starkiller Base is in here because Starkiller Base serves as a metaphor for Kylo Ren. And that plays out in a really good way in the scene with Han and Kylo Ren, because the base as a metaphor for Kylo Ren actually plays out in the production design, and it works emotionally in that Starkiller Base is a weapon that consumes the light and seems to destroy the light, and Kylo Ren wants to destroy the light himself, and that's how it works. But Kylo says when he's like struggling that he's going to be torn apart, and this base is torn apart by its use as this weapon, and then the nice thing is at the end, when the weapon is destroyed, it doesn't explode. It turns into a sun, so it's a restoration of the light. And so I really do feel like, from a speculative content, that's for me really telling. I think that really says that there will be a redemption for Kylo, that he's, it's going to be a rough road, and he will be in a way destroyed by being used as Snoke's weapon, but he's also going to, at the end, come back to the light in a big way. So,
yeah.
And so,
I think that's a really good reading of it.
Yep. And I think that they were just allured by that, they were overly charmed with that idea, unfortunately, and that's not always a good reason to put stuff in. This part is the part I was talking about where Finn says, "We came back for you." And for me, this is like a big transformative moment for her. Like she's very changed by that and very moved by it. And when you think about the character at the beginning of the movie, when she like wouldn't even take his hand, didn't want his help, and here, like she doesn't need his help, but she values that somebody loves her and cares for her, right? Yeah. And is willing to come back for her, and that's really important to her arc in this film.
Yeah. No, she's got that really disbelieving expression on her face. Like, she really can't quite believe that someone did actually return for her for once in her life. And that is really moving when you think about everything she must have been through.
Yeah. And so, so one thing I was thinking about this, the Starkiller Base, I had an idea the other day, which was like, maybe if they, they could have done this in a different way that might have been at least different from the old trilogy, but even reinforce the metaphor they were going for a little more strongly, which is that maybe they shouldn't have had the Poe and his starfighters destroy the base. Maybe they should have had the base have an inherent flaw, right? That they, that the heroes like realized that the structure of it would not work, that it would fall apart on its own, and that could have set up a ticking time bomb, essentially, that still would have added a lot of impetus to trying to go and save Rey and do it in time and stuff, but wouldn't have required all these dumb scenes with the fighters, and it would have been more tightly connected to the idea that of how Ren is like Starkiller Base, and maybe it's just like the internal struggle itself of trying to subsume your light side. It will destroy what you're trying to be as a weapon by itself. So I wish maybe we could have done that. But I think you're right. There probably was some time pressure in terms of trying to get a story to pull together.
I do wonder if that was something that was... I do wonder if that was something that was changed, because we know that there was a plan for Poe to die at some point. So there must have been a version where he played no role in the third act because he was dead. So I do kind of wonder if that X-Wing stuff was added later, and then, but like as a way of having something to do with Poe in those scenes. And that is a bit infuriating to think about, because it's like, you shouldn't have done it.
Okay, so damn you, Oscar Isaac, because I know Oscar complained that he was going to get killed, and so they tried to accommodate him. And hopefully next movie's going to be great for Poe.
No, I get a much better vibe from what they're doing with Poe in The Last Jedi. I think Ryan is actually going to do genuinely interesting things with that character. So yeah, I'm excited.
Yep. I think I've said before, I feel a little bit sad that she's wearing Finn's jacket here, and I feel like I missed out on some awesome sweet scene where he gave her the jacket. But that's the way it goes. That's
one criticism of the film, and that the continuity can be very, very bad in terms of costuming. Yep. Like, it happens a lot with Kylo as well, in terms of, is he wearing the shawl? Is he wearing his helmet? Is he... what? I don't understand.
What's the logic,
Yeah, like, it's obviously because it's scenes put in places they weren't originally intended for, or scenes where there is missing connective tissue to a certain degree. But it's fine, really. It's kind of a nitpicky thing, so it doesn't impede the flow of the story.
Yep. And so here's this scene. Do you have I've been through this before. So do you have stuff you want to talk about here with Kylo Ren and Han and this big moment?
Sure. So it's really, really interesting to me, and I love it, especially as kind of like a comment on masculinity and like the relationships between fathers and sons, because I don't think you see that kind of material or that kind of subject, at least, handled as The Force Awakens handles it, and I think it does it in this really moving and authentic way. And I think you can feel a lot of reality to it as well, because I know that in real life, Harrison Ford's son is named Ben as well. So there's the question of, did he have input in what Kylo's birth name ended up being? And I think when he calls out Ben, you do feel this really like intense, powerful emotion in it that feels like he's drawing on something very sincere. And yeah, it's just so interesting, all that rage and defiance from Kylo, but then you see it fall apart and you realise what a dreadful facade it all is. Because he may say, your son is gone, I destroyed him, and he says all this stuff that he wants to believe is true, but like as soon as his father starts coming out to him with these home truths, then it all falls apart for him, and he realises just how much of a pretender he is, and then he just becomes this complete emotional wreck. And I think it's so well performed by both of them.
Yeah, it's an incredible set of performances, and I'm sure this is, it's scenes like this, which is why Adam Driver was hired for this role. I love how Han, clearly touches him, right? And Harrison does a great job too of being like surprised that he breaks through. I mean, like one thing that I think, going into this, it feels like Han is going into this with an expectation that he might not come out of it, right? And then he's briefly surprised that no, maybe what he's saying is going to work, which makes the next moment all the more painful, right? And tragic.
Yes, it's really moving, because in the earlier scene with Leia, we realise that Han kind of has lost hope in his son. But here we see him like clearly desperate to believe that his son does have light left in him. And he's really confronted by how much he loves his boy, probably for the first time in years, because he's been running from it for so long. And there's something so tragic and moving about that. And especially that moment after the saber goes into him and he reaches out his hand and touches his face, that just gets me every time. That's the moment that makes me well up properly.
I don't know if that was I like to think that maybe Harrison added that on his own or whatever. I don't know if that was in the script, because it's I don't know, whoever thought to touch him afterwards, it was a great choice. Because the thing about it is, it sort of says, even after he kills him, to sort of give him that sort of very loving caress, from my perspective, at least, says he still loves his son. He still wants him to come back, even after this horrible act. And that's, for me, I think, really important, right? Because like there's a, certainly a debate in the audience about, in the fandom about, like, has he crossed a line that you can't come back from? But for me, like, watching that, Han, even after the act, wants him to return. And for me, I think too, like I've said before, that a lot of the other characters are trying to engage with the fight by finding the connection, a love that's going to tie them to doing the difficult fight. And he's trying to do the opposite, right? Like he's trying to get more tightly bound to the dark side by cutting off love from his life, right? Yeah. He's trying to cut off the love of his father. And when he kills him, and then his father caresses his cheek and says, I love you anyway. For me, that locks Ren in to a redemption, as far as I'm concerned, because he is not able to cut off his father's love, even when he commits the most heinous act. And I think I've said before, like for me, it's like the Obi-Wan moment of, strike me down and I'll become more powerful than you ever imagined. By killing him, and having his last moment with his father be one of such self-sacrifice and love for him. it's going to be something that sort of permanently haunts him. And it's probably more powerful than if he'd left his father alive.
Yeah, definitely. I think from a story perspective, if Kylo does only go deeper and deeper into the dark side after that moment, then that kind of makes Han's death futile. Like, it doesn't really serve any purpose to the narrative going forward. Yeah. Because we already think that Kylo is a bad villain who's done horrible things. Like, and so he's just going to become more of a bad villain who does even worse things now. Like, it's kind of like he's reached the pinnacle of evil with that act. So where else do you go from that? Like, what other evil things can he do? Like, is he going to go and like slaughter younglings after Granddad's example or something? It's just becomes absurd. And now we are at the forest scene with Kylo, Finn, and Rey, and Kylo's just thrown Rey into the tree.
Oh yeah.
That traitor scream, that's so fascinating to me. Like, and how shit, like, just completely deranged Kylo looks in that moment. Like, it's fantastic.
Yeah. So what do you think lies behind that, that passion that Kylo has at that moment?
I think one of the very, very first things I posted on my Tumblr blog, which I created like 4 days after I saw Force Awakens, was like a post explaining that I thought that when he said traitor, Kylo was talking about himself really more than Finn, because he feels that self-loathing and he feels that betrayal that he committed against his father. It's like the worst kind of betrayal, the betrayal of your own flesh and blood by murdering them. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it's all those feelings of self-hatred coming out really, and I think that also fuels his violence in the battle. Because he's really, really disproportionate in how he treats Finn. Like, it kind of, like, just becomes brutal. Like, he literally punches Finn in the face at one point. And there is no need for that. He's already defeated. He's already disarmed. It's very, very interesting. I love this fight for that reason. Because there's so much going on from a character perspective. Like, I would take this over the mall fights in The Phantom Menace any day of the week. Basically.
Oh yeah. All this stuff is great, and so that I have to say that's a great set of insights about him that I don't think I've heard before. So that was great. Do you have anything in particular you want to talk about? Like, this is like such a huge moment, right? Like, this is the moment she. Yeah. This is like the transformative moment for her, like the really like final, like she's sort of been taking steps down a path. She pulls that saber. She seems surprised by it. But she's changed, right? She's accepted taking up the fight. So the thing that I always find kind of, I'm sorry, the thing I always find kind of striking is that when she gets the saber, she looks shocked and like she has trepidation. They cut to him. He almost has like a little smile, right? Yeah. Which is hard to read. Like, my interpretation is like he's attracted to her, right? He wants to be with her in some way, right? Like, I think he feels desperately alone, and he sees this person who is like him, and I feel like he feels like he has no one he feels like that he can trust. And he feels like he's sort of caught between, Snoke and Luke and his family, and doesn't know what the right thing to do is. And here's a young person who's sort of equally lost, right? And so I think he's sort of attracted to her because their situation is the same. Maybe they can. Maybe this is a person he can trust and be with when there's nobody else who can understand him, and there's nobody else that he can be with. So. I don't know.
I think it can't be stated enough that, like, Rey is basically his only peer, like, in the truest sense of the word, because all the other young Force users were presumably killed in that destruction of the temple incident. So there is no one left, really, apart from Kylo and Rey. So it's natural for him to feel this sense of wonder, because they're like the last of their kind. Yeah. Kind of, it's almost like a weird antagonistic Dark Crystal thing. If I remember that film correctly, like all the Gelflings are dead, apart from like the two main hero Gelflings, who are a boy and a girl, and like they come together over the course of that film and unite their powers to heal the broken crystal. That's the title of the movie. So you find lots of stories like this where there's these two special characters who are like the last of their kind to some extent, and they're united by that similarity, and then that forces them to confront other similarities, and then like their relationship develops and deepens through that. We're back to Kylo and Rey now, and oh man, this is perhaps like one of the absolute highlights of the film for me. Just those wonderful shots of them both on the cliff edge, like, and how tight they get on their faces, and it's just such a brilliant showcase for the actors.
I would say, like, too, like, at this point, like, and I haven't really pointed out all the places that the blue and light motif has been used really strongly, but here you get it really strongly, right? Like, there's this flashing of blue and red light between the two of them, and you can see that they're both struggling, I think, with dark and light forces. I
really like it. So I think you can almost see, like, Kylo almost becomes calm from being but close to her in that way, whereas Rey only becomes more angry and more animalistic. So you see Kylo and he starts off snarling and baring his teeth like an animal, but then at the end of that exchange of choker shots, it's Rey who has that kind of expression, and it really is like a very great visual representation of this mirroring between the characters and how they feed off each other to a certain extent. And yeah, it's so great, and I love how this dynamic is so deeply thought out throughout this film. So it's not just dialogue based, it's about the performances, it's about the lighting, it's about the scenery surrounding them. It seems like so much of this film is framed around these two characters and driving home the points that are made about them, like, in more obvious ways.
I agree with you. Like, you just get the sense that here, like, she, like, just went over the edge, like, you know, she's on the edge of the dark side, like she's on the edge of the cliff, and Daisy does a great job, and she just sort of shakes herself out of it, right? Like, she's like possessed, and then sort of shakes herself out, and like, what happened?
It's like she's woken up from a trance or something, like she wasn't quite herself. Oh my gosh, I just noticed how Hux, like, pauses and looks at some of the crashing rubble as he's going to report to Snoke. I never realised that before. It's like, oh god. Oh, it's amazing. I cannot wait to see what Snoke's definition of complete his training is. It's
I know.
Is it going to be like Rocky style montage, or... The thing is, I really don't think it can be that much physical training. So it seems like Kylo is very adept as a fighter when he isn't completely deranged and emotional. And I don't think Snoke is like a combat instructor, but who knows? Yeah, well,
there's such a, I feel like there's such a split between the original trilogy and the prequel fans on this whole subject, right? Because, like, in the original trilogy, I think for people like me who really feel like that's what Star Wars is, like, yeah, Luke gets training in that trilogy, but the important part of that training is never, like, the physical training, right? It's not the Rocky style part, and in fact, the parts of that are in there are kind of ridiculous. But it's that those scenes are really about. Oh, here's the restoration of the light. Those scenes are really about. Setting up the stakes for the confrontation with Vader, for explaining what Luke's challenges are to sort of prepare him psychologically for what's ahead and stuff. It's all about the psychology and the emotions of the character, and not really about learning how to lift rocks with your mind or whatever. So, so I think that's very strange. But I know the prequels have like a much more, elaborated idea of what the Force is and the rules around it. And so those fans tend to be very, I think a lot of them are kind of angry at this film because it's not following their rules, their expectations and stuff. But I think original trilogy fans have a very different view of how the Force works that that it's more that anybody can connect with it. It's about reaching out with your feelings, right?
Yeah, totally.
So
Yeah, no, oh, gosh, what was I going to say? I hate that when you lose the point that was in your head. Sorry. Oh, yeah, let's just talk about what's on screen. So, yeah, it's the Rey and Leia hug. And I really love this moment. Like, again, it feeds into that whole thing of really liking any moments in this film where they're about women connecting with each other, because it is rare. And while I love The Force Awakens and I love Rey, I wish there had been a stronger cast of female characters around her. And that's one of the main reasons why I'm particularly excited for The Last Jedi, because there are lots of new female characters. And I'm really curious to see how they play into the story and what their functions are. So yeah, it should be really good.
yeah, I'm excited about it as well. So,
Yeah.
and I love the hug with Rey. Leia gave like such a strong and lovely sort of maternal vibe to that.
Yeah.
To that hug that I know people complained about her not acknowledging Chewie or whatever, but I'm like, oh come on, Rey is like this broken child who's all alone in the world. Who I think Leia can really understand because they have sort of a Force connection, but also like Leia has a bizarre history, right? Being kidnapped by her father and tortured and all these things. There's similarities to the story, and I don't know. It's a nice connection for me.
Yeah.
So it works for me. But and here's like the stuff with R2D2 and BB-8, and I've often complained about R2 in this movie. This is my least favorite part of the movie.
Right.
That R2 is asleep inexplicably. But I was thinking that once again there's sort of a thematic element to that map coming together, because it's sort of the old and the new coming together, right? That you have the old elements from the old movie and the new movie have to come together to move us forward. And so I think maybe they put it in there for that.
Yeah.
And here's this
definitely.
really, really tender moment with Finn. Do you have anything you want to say about this goodbye? Or
I think it's really sweet. And again, it drives home that point to me of Rey has got closure, kind of, on that relationship, at least for now. Obviously, she's going to see Finn again, but it's not like she is in fear about Finn, because she knows he's in the best possible hands.
Yeah.
And she's been told he's going to be okay. So she can go forward and be in peace about that. But yeah, I'm really fascinated to see like how much The Last Jedi is going to pursue that whole Rey and Finn dynamic. Like, how important is that going to be to Finn especially? Like, because I know that he has a new friendship with Rose in The Last Jedi, and it seems like she's the character that he's going to be spending much of his time with. And yeah, like, how would his dynamic with Rey from The Force Awakens play into that, if at all? Like, I'm sure it will to some extent, but it's just a question of, is it something he mentions early on and then he finds out she's with Luke and everything's fine and then he moves on? Or does it play a bigger part in his development? So, yeah, we will see.
Yeah, it's tricky because, they're so important to each other in this movie, and then we're going to separate them for a long period of time. So,
yeah,
that has to work emotionally as well. So I think it's a little bit of a tricky part of the new film.
I love this final sequence on Act 2. And I also particularly love it because of how it kind of calls to mind that opening sequence with Rey, where it's all just completely silent and it's just the music, and you get to know her through the music. Here again, it's a return to that silence, and you just experience the emotion of the climax of the film purely through that wonderful score. Because I think of all the tracks on the soundtrack for the Force Awakens, the Jedi Steps is probably the one I go back to the most often, because it's just so wonderful.
Yeah, so I think I said this in my other commentary. The other commentary I did, I was only willing to make one speculation for the film, and it was about Luke. And my speculation at that time was that Luke going into the next movie would have to be on this island and doing things because he's afraid. That fear would have to play into his motivations, just because all the all the heroes in this movie, Finn and Rey and Han, are all motivated by fear, and they all struggle with abandoning their duty, right, to the fight.
Yeah.
Because of that fear, and then they have to overcome that in the movie. And so you can't help but notice that there's another hero that everybody's talking about who also seems to have abandoned the fight. Like, we need him back in the fight, and he's not there. And so since the themes of this movie were driven home so hard across so many characters, for me, that tells me that the same things are going on with Luke, and Luke is also being, to some extent, driven by fear, and he's going to have to overcome that, and he's probably going to overcome that through some connection of love with somebody. And I was a little bit worried during the last few months, because Ryan spent a lot of time saying Luke's not a coward, and I was like, oh no, my prediction's not going to come out. But I think he was I should have known he was sort of saying that because he was probably thinking about that Luke was to some degree afraid. Like, if that wasn't even on the table, he probably wouldn't have been talking about it. And it turns out, when you look at the trailer, fear is a big part of what's going on with Luke in that new movie. And so I was like, thank goodness. Not that like my prediction had to be true. Like, Ryan could have gone on to make a completely different film that doesn't really have a good connection to this film. But I feel like if you want to have that level of continuity in the story, it felt like that aspect, that carry through on the themes, needed to happen in Luke's story, at least at the beginning. So
yeah, no, definitely. Like, it's a wonderful way to close the film, and I think your prediction has obviously turned out to be dead on. And I think, if anything, like, that indicates to me that Rian Johnson saw The Force Awakens, and he saw at least broadly similar things to what you and I did. So I think our interpretations of The Force Awakens are broadly similar. We obviously disagree and have different interpretations of certain things, and that's fine. But I think for the most part we get similar things from it, especially on like a thematic level and on a character level. And based on the decisions Rian Johnson has made for The Last Jedi, at least as is evident from the interviews he's given and from the trailers, which are of course only going to tell a very limited version of the truth, like, it's really quite reassuring to a certain extent that I was seeing things that were actually important and are going to be pursued going forward. So yeah, I'm super excited about Ryan's take on the next film. I think the teaser trailer was nice, but the new trailer has me so excited. Same. so good.
Yeah.
It's literally like the trailer of my dreams. It's ridiculous.
I think so for me too. Like, I think about it. I think, like, could I imagine a trailer that I would have been more satisfied with? And I cannot imagine a way in which that would occur. So it has like everything that you would want, right? Like, as far as I'm concerned, like, it has Luke starting at the right place. It has Rey being challenged right away with her expectations. She's going to be given a hard set of tasks to deal with. I was a little bit worried too from stuff that Ryan had said that she might get sidelined in the next movie and it would all become about Luke. I know a lot of fans are like, have a high anticipation that, like, really in their hearts they want this to be Luke's film. So I needed to see that Luke was going to be important in the film and Luke was going to be interesting in the film, but the main thrust of the film is still about the new characters. And then, see that Finn has really awesome stuff that he's going to be doing, that we are going to get some really touching moments with Leia and Kylo Ren, and then of course having the movie end with what looks to me like what I would have thought from the content of this movie, that Kylo Ren and Rey are going to join together in some way, and the details of that I think are still fairly open, but I watching this movie I didn't see how that wasn't going to happen. So it's nice to see that it all seems to fit together. And so and then, in terms of mood and style and stuff, it looks incredibly exciting to me. So I'm thrilled.
Yeah, no, it's really, really fantastic. And like, I think if anything, the trailer I produced in my dreams would probably be more conservative. Like, I think, oh no, these things couldn't possibly be happening, or at least they wouldn't be showing them in the trailer, And like, I love it, because if they're showing the kind of things they're showing in the trailer, what kind of madness and weirdness happens in the actual film itself? Because like, I feel like everything's going to be so unexpected. Like, and it's wonderful, and it's going to be wonderful to go in and be truly surprised by a film I really care about, because I don't mean to constantly diss on Rogue One, but I didn't have like massive anticipation for Rogue One. I wasn't like counting off the days until Rogue One. I saw it like early, and I was still looking forward to it, but it was kind of like another movie for me. But with these saga films, I'm so invested in these characters, and I'm so invested in the story The Force Awakens told about them, and so desperate to find out what happens next with that literal cliffhanger that we just ended on, that, yeah, like, my anticipation is through the roof, and I'm really looking forward to being surprised. Like, the task I've set myself now is just to try and clear my head as much as possible and go in with as few expectations as possible, so that I can just appreciate the movie on its own terms, because I think that's the least I can do, like, to enjoy it, if that makes sense. Because I think if you go in like with like this mental checklist of things you want to happen or expect to see, then I think there's always going to be inevitable disappointment. So I kind of did that the first time I saw The Force Awakens, because I had read all the spoilers for The Force Awakens before I went to see it. And so I had this certain idea about how everything was going to play out. And while on the bare bones level it did play out in that way, it's not the same as actually experiencing the film and seeing the nuance and seeing the performances and seeing the sets and the aesthetic of it all. So, yeah, like, I'm just excited to have that fresh first experience truly be my first experience. So I kind of had to school myself with The Force Awakens, and it was only on like viewing 2 or 3 that the film started to settle with me, and I really started to appreciate it. So yeah.
Well, I think it's a movie that even if you didn't come in with, like, I barely knew that there was a new Star Wars movie. I found out very late, and I came in and, you know, I think took a surface reading of it, super enjoyed it, didn't really think there was much to it or whatever. And it was only sort of when I went online and started having conversations with people about it and found that there were so many interpretations of the film, right? And then started to think a little bit more deeply about it. And then I came away with sort of 2 things, right? Which was, one, you know, my ideas about what the film was about changed as I sort of talked to people about it. My ideas about where it was going changed in a really fundamental way. But also, I really sort of came to really appreciate the film in a deep way. I think it's a really sort of masterfully done film. And I think it to a large extent it doesn't get as much credit as it should.
Totally.
So. And I hope the next film likewise is equally impressive on that front. But I feel like this is actually a hard bar to meet. So we'll see how it goes. But I've only seen Looper out of Ryan's work, and that's a great movie, and an interesting movie, and a movie that, you know, would fit, you know, if you were going to pick somebody to carry on watching that movie, you go, yeah, that could be really interesting. So I have pretty high expectations. The other thing is, you know, I think watching the trailer, and when like you and I watched the trailer, I think having spent a lot of time thinking about the film and talking about the film and writing about the film, like all our expectations were met, and we were like, wow, this is really going to go the way we want. But I think you've probably talked to people. I certainly have talked to people who, when I talked to them and said, "Hey, did you watch the new trailer or whatever?" They were like kind of confused by it. They were like, you know, like I explained to a friend of mine some of the speculative theories, and sort of especially the contrast between people who thought that Rey was Luke's daughter, sort of the Rey Walker theories, versus the people who think the emphasis would be more on the relationship between Kylo Ren and Rey, sort of in that sort of Reylo camp or whatever. And I explained to him that those are sort of the 2 major camps of speculation and stuff. And he's just a very much a general audience viewer, and he hadn't really thought about the Reylo piece before. I think like a lot of people will take a surface Rey Walker reading, and certainly I did the first time I saw the movie.
Same.
And once and once I talked him through the Reylo stuff, he was like, oh, so that's what the trailer was about. He was like, I thought that was really weird. He was like, I didn't understand the last two shots. And I was like, oh, I totally understood the last two shots. So when you get so deep into this film, especially a film that has underlying meanings that are not necessarily apparent on first viewing and stuff, you have a very different response to that trailer, right? And I think they do feel like they probably had to sort of, and I sort of predicted this over the last year, that because the speculation camps have been so intense, and I feel like they sort of intentionally led people down the Rey Walker scenario. I think a little bit possibly to hide the alternate path, the sort of Kylo Ren and Rey come together path. When you're looking at them as related, it kind of obscures the other interactions in the film. Yeah, but because they were doing that, they've created really strong expectations that may be wrong, and I felt like I kept waiting over the past few years for them to start dialing back some of this stuff, and they certainly did kill some of the speculations early, right? Like the speculation that Rey was Han and Leia's daughter. They just killed dead right away, right?
Yeah, sure.
Because they just had Daisy say that's not true. But
although I must say it's interesting because in response to the trailer, I've watched trailer reactions where in the follow-up people say, well, I guess this means Rey and Kylo must be brother and sister, right? Like, very sincerely, like, they clearly genuinely think this. And it's very interesting to, again, see how people without all this, like, obsessive immersion and all this stuff perceive these things, you know, to get that outlook. It's interesting.
Right, yeah. Well, and if people aren't paying attention, I mean, only the crazy people like you and me are paying attention to to all this extra messaging that they're giving.
Exactly.
But... so I felt like that they needed to start dialing back some of the stuff, and at this point, I think it's very hard for me to imagine any legitimacy to like a Rey Walker interpretation, given. I always thought that was, well, didn't always. Like I said, when I first saw the movie, that was my interpretation. But after I spent a lot of time thinking about it, it felt to me like that could not be the interpretation because especially because in this movie, the whole point of Rey's story and Rey's arc is and Maz's message, I think, to her is move ahead, right? Don't look behind you for your family. Look forward for a belonging that you choose yourself. And she finds that in Finn, and so then to go and say no, it's actually Luke, feels to me like a backtrack of everything that this movie is about.
Yeah, totally. It undermines it, in my opinion.
And then all the trailers and accessory materials just sort of chipped away at a Rey Walker scenario so intensely. In this last trailer, you watch it and you're thinking, I know people who still believe, and I think if you go into a more general audience scenario, I was just listening to a fan commentary about, I think it was actually maybe it was like a Rogue One or something. I went and watched a fan commentary on YouTube, and and it was very, very recent. It was done in the last month, and those guys were still saying, yeah, she's his daughter and stuff. So there are people who do feel like that.
Yeah, many people, I think.
But I still feel like if you're really paying attention to the film and what's going on in the film, it's hard to see that, and it's so hard to see it from the trailer right now, right? Because that's just nothing of that interaction between those two characters in that film reads as a father-daughter relationship, and it also doesn't. We didn't really talk about the hero and the heroine's journey. It just doesn't fit with the place we are in those kinds of stories, to go back to your father.
Yeah. Exactly. It's all about moving forward rather than looking back, which is with a very obvious message of The Force Awakens as well. Right, Lisa, this has been amazing, but the film has actually ended. So we get somewhat overrun there. I think we should wrap it up here. But yeah, it's been really fun doing this. I've really enjoyed doing the commentary.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this with me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, so thanks for listening, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed.
Yep. Bye.